Don't wait. Protect your privacy, build your brand, and get your complete business identity in just 10 clicks and 10 minutes. Visit northwestregisteredagent.com/achiever free. Just head to talkhiatry.com/achiever and complete the short assessment to get matched with an in-network psychiatrist in just a few minutes. Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/anxiousachiever. That's shopify.com/anxiousachiever. Just head to brevo.com/achiever to take your marketing further with Brevo and its AI assistant, Aura, which will help you craft smarter campaigns and create great content. Today, two negotiating masters on how to negotiate well when you feel strong emotions, when you're anxious. First, Chris Voss, former FBI hostage negotiator, author of Never Split the Difference. And then Moshe Cohen, who teaches at BU and is really an expert. And this is one of the things that you will love in this episode and you will never forget, at how to regain our agency and our power when we are taken aback by strong emotions during a negotiation. So if negotiating is something that you do every day, which we all do, and it brings up strong feelings and maybe some wobbles, you're going to get a lot of it this episode. And before we dive in, I just wanted to remind you that I have an app. Go to studio.com and get the Anxious Achiever Coaching app. It is full of reflections and exercises and videos and meditations. And it's a coach. It's like having, me in your pocket as you go through the workday, wanting to manage your energy, manage your anxiety, and lead with strength. So go to studio.com/Mora, just like my first name, studio.com/Mora, and get the Anxious Achiever Healthy High Achieving app. Now on with the show.
Yeah, because it permeates everything we do. Me and my team, we've always felt that if the words I want or I need are in anybody's brain in a conversation or in the air crossing anybody's lips, you're in a negotiation. I want a cup of decaf after dinner. And if you've been a jerk at the meal, I know for a fact waiters will bring you caffeinated coffee. It permeates. Anytime you want collaboration, you're in a negotiation, period. And then recognizing that across the board is just the reality of existence. Now, whether or not you respect that and how you deal with it are two separate questions. But anytime collaboration is involved, you're in a negotiation.
So negotiation isn't just the moments when we think we're negotiating, like we're negotiating a raise or getting a new job or buying or selling. It's literally happening every day.
Yeah. And like when you realize that you're in a negotiation, you've actually probably been in it for a while.
Really?
Which is a shame to realize it that late. Like a company that I did a keynote for recently, if I'm doing a keynote for them, our negotiation training is probably appropriate for them. They're trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
But they've already committed to somebody else's book, somebody else's methodology. So I always ask them, like, what have you guys built your methodology around? And recent one was customer-centric selling. And so I bought the book and I'm looking through it, and it has a small chapter at the very end about negotiation. Now that you finally all done all this, now you're in a negotiation. And I see that I'm thinking like, oh my God, you were in a negotiation so much sooner, but you got a sales book that tells you that it is the 10th step of a 10-step process, when in point of fact, there was a negotiation and positioning that's been going on since step one.
Yeah. If negotiating is so common, why are a lot of us so scared about it? Why does it make us so anxious?
Well, it's how we hardwired to react to conflict. Very few people actually like conflict. At least 2/3 of us don't like conflict, at least. Then what's the feedback that we have in the world as to what negotiation is about? I mean, Donald Trump, I'm the greatest negotiator in the world. People who do business with Trump get tired of getting beaten up by him. He can do a phenomenal job at getting things kickstarted. But after a while, you're like, if this dude's going to yell at me and threaten me and sue me, why do I want this? And people don't want to be that way. But then everybody imagines that guy in their brain. Like, we talk to people all the time. Like, what's in your head as you're getting ready to go into a negotiation? Because we want to see if it backs up our three types. And we believe there's three types: fight, flight, make friends, to conflict. And that the world splits up evenly into thirds. And so we try to get into the thought patterns of each one of the three. And regardless of which type you are, when we ask people, who are you preparing to encounter, everybody prepares and expects the table pounding, threatening, lawsuit threatening person on the other side. So I think that speaks to why we're apprehensive about it.
What are the three types?
Fight, flight, make friends. It's kind of caveman survival mode. Cavemen that were descended from, that survived when they saw a threat. They either fought it, they ran from it, they made friends with it. It's a derivation. Like when I went through the program on negotiation there at Harvard's winter negotiation workshop, they give everybody at the very beginning something called the TKI, Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument. And it breaks into 5 types. And then Harvard will throw 2 of the 5 out, leaving you with 3. And they are very close to the 3 types that I just outlined, slightly different names and verbiage. And then wherever they've tested them, the crowd splits pretty evenly into thirds. And so we started doing that test with everybody we taught at Georgetown and at USC or anywhere else. And we found consistently, like, a given group may skew more in assertives in one class, or there may be more analysts in another class. And when you even it out globally, you end up with the world being divided pretty evenly into thirds.
Fight, flight, or make friends.
Right. Right. And a fight guy, that's the obvious dude. The flight guy is actually highly analytical. They view conflict as just ridiculously inefficient. It's not a matter of courage. It's just a matter of analytical choice. And so why would I engage in this battle when even if I win, I'm at least going to get wounded. I'm not going to engage in any battles that I don't absolutely have to. And so they'll avoid them, which is what TKI calls them, avoiders.
So, Chris, I'm a person who has some social anxiety. I avoid people, if people I don't know, situations that make me feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And I have to walk into a negotiation. Say I'm asking for a raise. How do I prepare? How do I be a person who stays at the table and gets what I want when I'm so scared that that person is going to be a jerk who's going to yell at me?
Yeah, well, there's a mindset approach to it and a preparation approach. And, there's some pretty simple steps in terms of preparation. People are scared of stuff when in their brain, they're envisioning a really negative outcome. That's the...
Because they feel like they don't deserve it.
Or they don't deserve it, or even if they do deserve it, there's a whole variety of reasons why. It could be, number one, they don't deserve it. Number two, they do deserve it. The other side's never going to give it to them. So one way or another, they beat themselves before they even get to the table. So it's sort of a recognition, which is actually it's a normal human response, because the amygdala, we're hardwired to be negative, which can be defeated with some simple preparation. There's some routines, the same spiritual hygiene that you need to exercise on a regular basis just to be a happier person. Similar to that applied to negotiation approach. Like there's what's your approach to begin with, like to be inherently curious. Like curiosity is a superpower. We've been talking about curiosity as a superpower since before we discovered one of Taleb's books, which is Anti-Fragile. Of course, he wrote The Black Swan, which inspired the name of my company. But I just stumbled over Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile, which he wrote back in 2012. But he says that curiosity is an anti-fragile characteristic. When you're genuinely curious, you can't be afraid at the same time. The brain is not capable of both emotions. You can't be intimidated. You can't have self-doubt. Genuine curiosity to the world or the interaction is like this superpower, which it takes some practice and prep to get into that. But that's one of the ways, like, all right, so if you're not going to pay me, and I'm just really curious, why? What's behind? That kind of an approach is also non-threatening to the other side. The great thing about curiosity is you remove yourself as a threat to the other side.
They sense that. Okay, so talk us through, like, bit by bit. I'm so anxious. I'm walking into this negotiation. I'm walking into this meeting with my boss. The anxiety is so strong in me.
All right, so for it not to be work out is an outcome instead of the outcome. All right, so that's a possibility. And so worst thing that happens is I walk out exactly as I was before I walked in. But I realize just as a human being, there are other possibilities. So I'm curious as to what the other possibilities are. Or I'm curious about my boss's perspective on this. Maybe the boss is going to tell me something that'll help me get that money. Or maybe I'll find out that I'm in the wrong place to begin with. Like, there's all these possibilities that when you go from wondering to knowing, you're always better off. And one of the things that we're teaching people in Black Swan Method is like, look, even if you get the answer that you were most afraid of getting, you went from wondering to knowing, and that by definition always makes you better off, because the next decision that you have to make is enlightened if you wonder if something bad is going to happen to knowing it's going to happen. Now I can plan for that eventuality. But you can't really plan for it if you don't know.
So curiosity is a good one. And do you literally ask the questions as if you're curious? Do you ask your boss those questions, or is the curiosity more in your head?
Critical that you ask them as if you're curious.
Yeah.
Because that, how you're perceived then is you're no longer perceived as a threat. And if you're genuinely curious, then it elevates them because it gives them the opportunity to enlighten you, which is an elevating experience for them.
Makes them feel good.
Exactly. And they want more of it. They don't really realize that you are the magician that's creating that great feeling.
Is asking questions in general a good technique in a negotiation?
That in and of itself is a great question. A short answer is no.
Oh.
So you got to gather information. Now, first of all, how we're taught to ask questions, unfortunately, like confirming questions, like you're just respectful. Look, I'm just trying to confirm the following is true. Is this true? Or does this? Typically, most questions are slanted, seeking the word yes, which might be a very respectful intention, looking for mere confirmation. The problem is this whole sort of confirmation approach has been sort of hijacked by this yes momentum or momentum selling response, which the people that are going to pick our pocket and cut our throat have gotten very good at creating this yes momentum. Would you like to make more money? Would you like to live in a bigger house? Would you like to travel the world for free, stay in 5-star restaurants or hotels, eat at 5-star restaurants? Like, that hustle has been run on everybody. Everybody is battered. What we refer to as yes battered. Like, if I call you on the phone and I say, do you have a few minutes to talk? You're going to go, ooh, how long is a few minutes? If I say yes, what am I letting myself in for? Because you said yes to somebody else and you don't have a clear memory in your mind of when it happened. The 4 or 5 times you kind of got bamboozled with this yes stuff, which then makes everybody yes battered.
Yes battered.
That's a first problem with questions. Now, the second problem, Let's say you don't ask a yes question, but you ask a good open-ended question, and it's designed properly. And if it's designed properly, it probably starts with the words what, or how. And you ask it genuinely curious.
Mm-hmm.
Now the problem with that is they got to have the mental gas in the tank to answer. Because that triggers what Danny Kahneman would call slow thinking or in-depth thinking. Everybody has a decision capacity for each and every day. There's only so many decisions you can make in a day, which is why the most productive conversations that are really productive are usually in the morning, where people got a lot of gas in the mental tank. Now, getting in anytime, once you start climbing north of 11 a.m., you got circadian rhythm issues, you got food issues, you got how much sleep you got the night before, you got how much stress was in the day. People are not going to be able to answer in-depth, good, solid, stop you in your tracks, thinking questions once you start clearing noontime. What you have, how many carbs you have for lunch? Are you in a food coma? So that doesn't alleviate the necessity of gathering information. It just makes questions of a less and less effective tool. And then, depending upon who you're talking to, the analytical type doesn't want to answer a question until they've thought through every single response. And I've literally heard the CEO of a company who was highly analytical say, never answer a question sooner than 36 hours.
Wow.
Because you got to think about it. You got to think of all the implications. And you got to sleep on it. You got to bake on it. Now, the person asking a question doesn't want to wait 36 hours for the answer. So what do? What we found, which we were blown away by, the tiny shift from a question to basically a label. If I go from what have you got on your mind to you got some stuff on your mind? Like you're going to answer the second one. I can't explain the brain science behind it. I just know it to be true.
Yep.
I'm going to get a stream of consciousness out of you on the second one much sooner than I will and much cleaner than I will from a question.
Like me, you may have spent a lot of your work life wondering why some tasks that are simple for other people take you forever, why you procrastinate on certain things but not on others, or why you feel really anxious about certain parts of your job. Here's the thing, this is not a character flaw, it's wiring. Patrick Lencioni, author of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, created the Working Genius Assessment to help you identify the type of work that you're built for and the type of work that you're not. And the thing is, there's no shame in this, right? If you listen to this show, you understand that we are all wired differently. Things that are hard for me might be super easy for you, and vice versa. And that's why we're on teams. To be an amazing leader, you don't have to do it all. You have to know what you're amazing at. And that's where the Working Genius Assessment comes in. It's great. It gives you the clarity to stop wasting time on the things that drain you and that you'll never be good at and double down on what you're awesome about, leveraging your strengths. You can take the Working Genius Assessment today. It's quick, it's simple, it's powerful. I've taken it, as have millions of other people, and get 20% off with code ACHIEVER at workinggenius.com. Just go to workinggenius.com, enter the code ACHIEVER. You'll get 20% off, and you'll be so glad that you did. There's a lot more to your business than what you actually sell. Your business identity is everything that shows what your business is about, from what customers see to what they don't see, like operating agreements and compliance paperwork. And yes, if you're going to be successful, you need these things. Get more for your business, more privacy, more guidance, and more free resources to start and scale with Northwest Registered Agent. They've been helping small business owners and entrepreneurs launch and grow businesses for nearly 30 years. They are the largest registered agent and LLC service in the U.S. with over 1,500 corporate guides. And these are real people who know your local laws and can help you in your business every step of the way. And trust me, you're going to need that. So build your complete business identity fast with Northwest Registered Agent and get access to thousands of free resources, the forms you need, and step-by-step guides, even without creating an account. And with Northwest, privacy is automatic. So don't wait. Protect your privacy, build your brand, and get your complete business identity in just 10 clicks and 10 minutes. Visit northwestregisteredagent.com/achiever free and start building something amazing. Get more with Northwest Registered Agent at northwestregisteredagent.com/achiever free. What is the role of empathy? I mean, can you outline, and I don't want you to give away the farm here, but I know you talk about this. Can you outline a negotiation tactic from preparation to being in the room for someone who does better with empathy and being a bit more quiet, because they might be feeling anxious, than Mr. Alec Baldwin always be closing?
Yeah. All right, so that would really get back to your definition of empathy, which is why I ended up at Harvard Law School to talk about negotiation while I was still in the bureau, was because we didn't define empathy as sympathy. We said empathy is just being able to articulate the other side's point of view, period. No agreement, no disagreement, just verbal observation. So that really narrow definition, which is not common vernacular. Common vernacular equates empathy to sympathy, or a sharing of the emotions. We didn't have the sharing of the emotions part in there either. And so if you define it there in that really narrow area where it's not agreement, it's not an emotional resonance. Now, you might be able to see the other person's emotions, but you don't got to feel them. Recognizing them, I can see that you're angry without me being angry. Mm-hmm. I can say, I see that you're down. I don't got to be down to see that. That's our definition of empathy. And so then when you do that, it also unleashes
it's perspective taking more. It's like you can take the perspective of the other person.
Absolutely.
But you're not going to go solve their problems necessarily.
Absolutely. And, kind of the crazy thing about it is it's being able to articulate the other side's point of view. And, I'm thinking about, there's been a couple of talks about, non-scripted shows, television. We're in a conversation with a guy right now that puts programming out on TVs in airports. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking to myself, like, how can you possibly disagree with someone if you're not certain of what their perspective is? And how can you be certain of what their perspective is, be certain of what you're disagreeing with, unless you can state it to the other person and they can tell you that they've got your perspective accurate? Yet almost nobody can do that. Either first of all, it's really hard emotionally without practice, mm-hmm. which I think is the biggest barrier. I did, how many months ago was it when Israel was shelling Hamas in the Gaza Strip and they hit the AP office,
right,
and a bunch of other sensitive locations, because Hamas was in fact hiding weapons in the AP office and in a school and in a hospital. I mean, that's where Hamas puts their weapons. And so then the social media's vitriol was unleashed. And I did a clubhouse room with Nicole Benham, really good friend of mine. And she's Jewish, and she's like, this is exhausting. We gotta bring this out in the open. And so the premise of the clubhouse room that night was, we want people supporting Israel. We want people supporting Palestine. You are not allowed to attack the other side until you've expressed what you think their perspective is. And basically start out by saying, before I disagree, here's what I think your point of view is. Now, nobody fully, successfully articulated the other side's perspective. But the important thing about it was nobody got into a shouting match. And that was the first time Nicole had ever been involved in a discussion on social media in that time frame on Israel-Palestine that didn't devolve into a screaming name-calling match. Just a mere act of trying to make somebody articulate the other side's perspective automatically calmed them down.
So is that a good tool for me to do if I'm feeling anxious in a negotiation?
1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%. And we just, like, this had been staring us in the face for quite a while. And we just recently discovered, my son Brandon is talking, who's exceptional at applying these skills. He's probably better. He's better than I'll ever be. So he's in a conversation several years ago with a young lady that's now his wife and the mother of his child. And she is angry and she's packing to leave. And, we refer to this as a that's right moment. You got to articulate the other side's view so that they can look you in the eye and say that's right. So she's about out the door. And if they were just in a shouting match, this means he was upset too. So, but he doesn't want her to leave. So he knows that, last ditch effort, I got to let her know I understand. So he sat down and he did this inventory of everything that she was upset about. And then he said, all right, so you're mad with me because I do this, I do this, I do this. You expect this. I fail to do it. He did the laundry list of the things that was making her angry without contradicting, explaining, or saying but. Just nothing. And she said, that's right. And she said, I'll stay. So he's telling us his story because we're working on another book, as a way to show how powerful getting a that's right out of somebody could be. And I said, wait, hold it. Look at what it did to you to go through that process, because you had to have been furious when you started. And for you to shift instantly in the mindset to demonstrate empathy calmed you down. And that's when we decided, I use that as, the impetus to the Israeli-Palestinian thing. It was like, look, you could badmouth the other side all you want. You could be born in Palestine and you could have the laundry list of the sins that Israel has committed, and you can pound them with that after you simply lay out what their perspective is.
So talk about that's right. What does that's right signify?
When you said something that the other side believes is completely accurate, and if you've done it with any insight, you've actually triggered an epiphany in them. And so when we wrote Never Split the Difference, we're kicking this around with Tall, and Tall said, I think it creates a subtle epiphany in the other side. So I'm like, cool, that makes sense. Let me look up the neuroscience of epiphany. And among the neurochemicals that you get a hit of in an epiphany is oxytocin, which is the bonding drug.
Yeah, it's good.
And then we started going back and reflecting and reapplying this. And Trump is only one example of a charismatic leader, only the most recent example. So to single him out would be to diminish the accomplishments of other charismatics. And love him or hate him, he's a charismatic. And people are bonded to him. And our hypothesis is when Donald Trump stands up in front of a crowd and articulates their perspective, the media, it's fake media or, fake news. He begins to articulate what's in their head, and they look at him and they go, that's right. And the durability of the devotion of followers to charismatics, we are completely convinced it's as a result of this oxytocin bonding. When the other side says something that you believe to be the complete truth and you are all in, you say, that's right. And bang, people are bonded.
So is that's a tool that I can use as an anxious person, but who maybe is good at picking up on unsaid cues or good at asking questions. I can get someone to the that's right moment. And that's a skill. Yes.
It's a skill. And the other thing that's cool about it is, and I'm a huge fan of Andrew Huberman these days, neuroscientist out of Stanford, great guy, Huberman Labs podcast, like insane amount of usable science. So I'm always looking at him for information. He did one recently on the neuroscience of relationships. And he talked about oxytocin, and the thing that he threw in, like if you get a hit of oxytocin, you're more likely to tell the truth. So if I can trigger a hit of oxytocin in you in a negotiation, you're less likely to lie to me after that point.
Huh.
That's like being at Hogwarts and having, Dumbledore tell you how to do a spell, right?
Do I talk a lot to get them to the what's right moment? I think one of the questions I hear from people who have anxiety is, I'm worried I'm going to talk too much, or I'm worried I'm not going to talk enough. How much do I talk to set the stage?
Yeah, I think the 5-to-1 ratio is about good.
What's that?
Like you can't go dead silent, but the other person definitely needs to be talking more than you.
Okay.
And that's why, the skills on the list of the negotiation 9, a lot of them are designed for you to drop something in and then go dead silent, dynamic silence. Because you got to, like the label that I referred to earlier, sounds like there's something on your mind. I got to go dead silent to let that sink in and give you a chance to talk.
What about after the negotiation? I think that, because, a lot of times they're ongoing. People who have anxiety tend to ruminate, right? They stew and run things over and over in their heads. What advice do you have for people on how to sort of win after the negotiation if it's still ongoing once you leave the room? What should you do?
Yeah, 2 things. Well, first of all, always be thinking about, implementation. It's real easy for people to misunderstand implementation. Like what I had in my head, what you had in your head. We think it's obvious, but unless we verbally check with one another, it just ain't.
Right.
So, there's, don't be afraid to confirm and to clarify. A lot of people are afraid to confirm and clarify because they think it's going to make them look stupid. When in point of fact, the other side appreciates the heck out of it. Mm-hmm. And so this fear of looking stupid really gets in our way. Like, the Mark Twain phrase from way back when, I think just kills people because he says, to paraphrase, it's better to remain silent and let people think you're stupid than to speak up and remove all doubt. I think that has horrified people about clarifying. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that people really miss, hugely, so much, the last impression is a lasting impression. So whatever, everybody, the first impression is your second most important impression. The most important impression is the last impression. Last impression got to be positive. There's data behind this. Data and practice backs this up completely. And so, but what do people mostly do? They save the thing that was harsh that they were afraid to say. If they say it at all, the last impression usually ends up being a cheap shot. I got a guy trying to solicit me for this, his book writing company, and I ignored his emails twice, and he didn't get the message. So I sent him back. Look, I'm sorry. I got a book deal with somebody else. Take this as a final no. Thank you for your effort. And so he writes back to me, and he says, I appreciate you getting back to me. So just so you know, we're going to remove you from our list. And then he signs it. And I thought, what a really lousy way to end the interaction. Like that just left a really bad taste in my mouth. Like just really, really negative. And, since the guy had somewhat annoyed me, but I appreciated his persistence, like I'd be happy to get back to him and say, look, you got to understand, here's where you left me. So for your future success with others, don't ever finish an email with a cheap shot like that, because that comes off as a cheap shot. But the last impression is a lasting impression. So how do you fix that if you're not used to it? Typically, whatever you would said at the beginning of the interaction, because everybody knows how to open positively, at least use those same words to finish positively. Like if you're going in for a job negotiation, you probably say with your boss right up front, I love it here. This is a great job. It's been very satisfying for me. I'd love to be here for the next 20 years. That'd probably be pretty close to what almost anybody would come up with to open a job negotiation. Like how you walk out the door is going to be what is a lasting impression with your boss. And come heck or high water, you should at least, even if you got nothing out of the negotiation, you could finish by saying like, look, when I walked in here today, it was because I've loved this job and I would love to be here for 20 years. And that hasn't changed. Thank you for your time.
Wow.
And then walk out with that. Like scripting an ending that's completely true, does not compromise your integrity in any way, shape, or form. And if you could have worked things out, you would be happy to be there for 20 years. That's a completely true statement. So you're not engaged in some sycophantic move, which makes most of us feel dirty. You're not being a sycophant walking out of the door. You're not compromising your principles. You're saying something that's unequivocally true. If you could give me the compensation package that would retain me, I would love to be here for the next 20 years and live and die and bleed for this company.
Right. My last question, I never thought about the end, so that's super helpful. My last question is
nobody thinks it.
No one thinks about the end.
Nobody does.
You think about the start.
Right.
I get very emotional. I cry easily. I get very, very anxious, and sometimes it's hard for me to talk. And so when I'm in a negotiation with someone who is very rational and data-driven and non-emotional, I can become a puddle.
Yeah.
What should I do? Should I hire someone else to negotiate for me? Is there any way that I can win as a negotiator? If you've listened to this show and heard from many of the leaders and experts that we've had on, you know the really important role that psychiatry and medication can play when you're managing a mental health condition or a diagnosis. And it's hard to find a psychiatrist these days, right? It can be really challenging when you need medication support. Talkiatry was built just for that. It's virtual psychiatry that actually fits your life and your insurance. Therapy is really wonderful. I am pro therapy, but sometimes you need psychiatric care with licensed clinicians, right? This means that they can diagnose and prescribe medication if it's right for you. Talkiatry is a 100% online psychiatry practice, and it provides comprehensive evaluations, diagnoses, and ongoing medication management for conditions like ADHD, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, OCD, PTSD, and more. Unlike therapy-only apps, Talkiatry is psychiatry. And that means you're seeing a medical provider who can diagnose mental health conditions and prescribe medication if it's appropriate. So, if Talkiatry sounds like a great solution, after all, you can do it from your home, and all of their 600 plus clinicians are in network with major insurers, so you can use your existing insurance. Just head to talkiatry.com/achiever and complete the short assessment to get matched with an in-network psychiatrist in just a few minutes. Head to talkiatry.com/achiever and complete the short assessment to get matched with an in-network psychiatrist in just minutes. That's talkiatry.com/achiever to get matched in minutes. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Did you know that? And the thing that I love about Shopify, as I'm a pretty good shopper, is that it makes it easy and secure. You're busy, you're shopping, you find something online, you click to put it in your cart, and then you have to enter all your credit card info. But you don't have your credit card. It's downstairs or in another room, and you're feeling lazy. You think, I'll do it later. You don't do it later. Now, if you're a vendor, you've just lost a customer, but not if you use Shopify. That little purple pay button makes all the difference because it's one click and you've purchased. Simple as a tap on your screen. And Shopify works with some of the biggest household names to brands getting started. So if you want to sell online, Shopify is a great solution for you. Get started with your own design studio. There are hundreds of ready-to-use templates, and Shopify can help you build a beautiful online store that looks like you. It's like having a marketing partner in your pocket. It can help you get the word out, create email and social media campaigns. It makes you more efficient, whether you're uploading new products or trying to improve existing ones. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. And Shopify helps you find your customers with easy-to-run email and social media. They have 24/7 award-winning support And you can tackle all those important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. You don't need multiple websites. You don't need to figure out who's hosting what. Everything is all in one place, making your life easier as a vendor and making my life easier as a purchaser. So, see fewer carts go abandoned and more sales go with Shopify and their Shop Pay button. Sign up for your $1 a month trial today at shopify.com/anxiousachiever. Just go to shopify.com/anxiousachiever. That's shopify.com/anxiousachiever.
Well, the other crazy thing about the neuroscience and the labeling and stuff, like labeling, just slapping a label on an emotion diminishes that emotion every time. There's been a number of neuroscience experiments that have backed that up. They do these experiments where they induce negativity in people. They watch certain areas of the brain light up with the fMRI, and they have the person simply call out what they're feeling. And so you can self-label as well, which means in the moment, like the real struggle is, how do I get myself out of the negative emotion? You can say, look, I'm sad right now. I'm anxious. I'm fearful. I'm afraid. You can either say it out loud, you could say it to yourself. And it will diminish the emotion. I mean, in the moment, you can self-label and you can dig yourself out. And, that comes with practice. Like, that's one way to get out of it. There's other less effective methods. Like anger will retrieve you from the negative, sad, debilitating emotions. But anger will kind of only take you to the ability of being maybe a B- negotiator. Like the A+ negotiators don't use anger. They use curiosity. They use patience. They use deference. I'd be happy to stack Oprah's track record as a negotiator up against anybody. And the last thing that she's known at is being angry or a pushover. See, what a lot of people don't realize about Oprah seeming so nice, there ain't anybody on the planet talking about how Oprah's a pushover.
Why do you choose Oprah? I mean, Oprah's my hero, but why do you choose Oprah in particular as such a great example?
Well, when we got turned on to The Last Impression is a Lasting Impression, I was already a big fan of her accomplishments and like some of the greatest negotiations in the world. She gets Lance Armstrong on camera and gets him to admit everything. He didn't walk into that blind. Look at the people she's gotten on camera and the things that she's done. That's a phenomenal success. Look at where she started and where she is. But so anyway, then I sit down with a lady named Cindy Morey, who was Oprah's booker, still is, but at the time she'd been Oprah's booker for 19 years. And I'm telling her about the Gallup data where the last impression is a lasting impression. Human beings don't remember things how they happen. They remember the most intense moment and how it ended. And so I know of several hostage negotiations that we turn them around by taking over how each conversation ended. Not how they began, but how they ended. And so Cindy looks at me and she says, yeah, that's Oprah's philosophy and everybody that works for her. She said the entertainment industry is typically in a limo, out in a taxi. And at Oprah, it's in a limo, out in a limo. We make sure that every step of the way, especially at the end, that people feel like they've been held and treated with tremendous regard. And I'm like, wow, cool. Oprah's a hostage negotiator.
I love that. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
I have been delighted with this conversation. I have been looking forward to this since we first started talking about it. So the pleasure is all mine.
Moshe, I have to ask you, does negotiating make you nervous, or has it ever?
Oh, totally. So you see, I think there's two kinds of people that come to do what I do. Some are people who have never had difficulty negotiating, and they portray themselves as experts or master negotiators. And their take on things is, I'm wonderful at this. Let me show you what I do. If you do what I do, you'll be good too.
Yes.
And then there's people like me who say, I've struggled with a lot of this my whole life. And I've learned a few things along the way, so let me share them with you. And when I took my first negotiation class, I took it because I didn't feel like a very confident negotiator. I took it because I thought I was a bad negotiator. And over the course of the class, I realized I wasn't as bad as I thought I was.
Was there a specific negotiation that made you feel like you were a bad negotiator?
No, just my own conflict aversion. I think that, I have good skills, but in my heart of hearts, I'm a conflict averse people person or people pleaser. And when you're not comfortable with conflict and trying to make people happy, it's really hard to negotiate for yourself.
I mean, I think you just nailed it. I would also add when you have fear of rejection, conflict avoidant, people pleaser who fears being rejected above all.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a bad recipe to get an outcome that you want.
And yet what I've discovered is that you're not predestined to have a bad experience or get bad outcomes. A lot of the stuff you can learn. And in particular, what I've come to was the idea that you have to learn how to manage your emotions simultaneously with using your negotiation skills. And if you can balance the two of those things, I don't care who you are, you can do pretty well.
Learning to manage your emotions while doing anything else is, to me, the ultimate skill of adulthood.
It's not easy.
I think if more of us had the self-awareness and regulation skills to both be human and regulate our emotions, the world would be a lot better place.
Mm-hmm.
So nervous is another word for anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about being nervous before negotiating. I'm interested to see in your class or in the real world, how often you've seen real anxiety come up in people before a negotiation or even a negotiation exercise.
So constantly. When we go into our first negotiation in the class, it's a competitive negotiation. People pair up. It's strictly about outcome. There's a buyer and a seller. Buyers try to buy low. Sellers try to sell high. And then we post the results on the board. Everybody has to write their names on the board, and I show the whole class their numbers. And the degree of anxiety that shows up in that room is through the roof. And, I do that on purpose because I want people to experience that in order to then be able to give them tools to deal with that. So when they feel that in their real negotiations, they can start managing how they're feeling and what they're doing. Because, anxiety isn't bad. It just is, right? Like any feeling, our feelings aren't bad. They just are. The question is, can we be aware of them in real time? Do we have tools to manage them so they're still there, but they're not driving the bus? And can we still do things effectively despite them?
Yep. Anxiety is not good or bad. It is. But I think that anxiety, and there's data to support this, can get in your way of a positive outcome because it can inhibit risk and it can cause you to freeze or simply not be able to move forward. So I'm just curious, when you're doing that exercise and everyone in the room is, or mostly everyone is anxious, do you acknowledge that? Do you ask them to look inside and ask themselves, are they anxious? Like, how do you treat that anxiety?
Well, I ask a more open-ended question. I ask them, how do you feel?
Yeah.
And, I do this differently for different exercises. Sometimes I'll ask them, okay, what was the first thing that came to your mind when I introduced the exercise? What happened to you when you found yourself alone with the other party and had to begin the conversation? Because anxiety doesn't show up once and then you deal with it and it's gone. It'll show up over and over again as you go through various stages of the process. So I ask a lot of questions to help people understand what's going on. And when I talk about people being nervous when they negotiate, it's before, after, and during. You can be, you can suffer from a lot of anticipatory anxiety going into your negotiation. And I'd say actually that's sometimes the worst of it, because what we don't know, we imagine, and in negotiations, we never know. So we're imagining an awful lot. And usually it's pretty scary stuff. So we can work ourselves into a lather. And then during the negotiation, over and over and over again, there are things that can happen that will, in a momentary way, cause our anxiety to spike.
Yes.
And then the question is, can we recognize it? Can we stop and then slow down time to be able to get back to a better place before we continue the process? I coach a lot of people in negotiations, and probably the two words I've said more than any others are slow down.
Talk us through that.
So anything that happens to you, anything anybody says, anything anybody does, any situation you walk into impacts you first on the emotional level. And emotions hit you very, very hard and very fast. And then they start subsiding. Meanwhile, your cognitive brain is slowly catching up. And only when your cognitive brain has actually overtaken your emotional brain are you once again a rational thinking human being. So what that means is that if you want to be responsive to situations rather than reactive, what you need to do is, first of all, identify the kind of things that typically send you into emotional overload. And it could be things like time pressure, authority figures, certain personalities, certain behaviors by the other party, subject matter, surprises. There are lots of things that could send you into emotional overload. You need to also understand what happens to you when you're emotional overload. Different people have different stress symptoms that show up, right? For some people, their heart rate goes up, their breathing changes. You might tremble, you might feel hot, you might feel it in your stomach, which, by the way, is called the collywobbles, which is why I called my book that.
That's what it is.
Yeah, it literally means butterflies in your stomach.
Wow. You're in amygdala hijack. Basically, your sort of primitive threat sensory system has taken over.
Absolutely.
And is telling you there's a threat ahead.
Absolutely. And, your cognitive brain will catch up if you just give it the time it needs. So then I talk about various techniques you can use to slow down time. And that could be anything from just staying silent and not saying anything, to asking for a break, to asking the person questions rather than responding to them. So you turn the floor back to them, and while they're talking, you're also calming down. Different people have different tools to get themselves back to a better emotional state. Different people have different stress symptoms, and each person has different triggers. So if you can identify, become more aware of all three of those things, your triggers, your stress symptoms, and the tools you can use to get to a better place, it's not perfect, but you can manage your emotions to a point where most of the time you can get back to being functional again and be responsive rather than reactive.
I feel like this is kind of an aha moment for me and for people who manage anxiety, which is the notion of slowing down time. Of course, when your anxious brain takes over, it wants to also make you feel better. So it's going to throw some pretty impulsive ideas at you. And you're just saying sort of press pause.
Right. I can think of so many times when something happened and I either said or did something I regretted later. And if I could have paused even 10 seconds, there's a pretty good chance I would have said something smarter. More is better, but 10 seconds can sometimes be all you've got. And even that can help. You got to be practical about these things. I'd love to say, go away for a day and come back, but that's not practical. Sometimes you can't. But even slowing down for a few seconds can often get you back to a better place.
Can we role play you using your technique? I guess I could be the other party.
Sure.
Okay. Should I start by saying something like, no, sorry, that price isn't going to work for me?
So it sounds like the price I'm proposing isn't working for you. Tell me more about that.
I mean, it's just too high. I could get 1 million other people for a much lower price, and you know it.
So one of the things you're saying is you have alternatives. There's other people that do what I do. And you feel like if you're not getting good value from me, then it's not worth your while to work with me. You'd rather work with other people. How would you define what value looks like in this situation?
I want a good product for a fair price.
So what does a good product look like?
Well, now I have to pause and think, see.
Now, there's two things going on here. One, as a negotiator, I'm exploring your interests and trying to get a sense of what makes you tick. But as an anxious person, the more I get you to talk, the less I have to talk. And while you're talking, I'm also catching my breath and getting to a better place so I can respond strategically rather than react emotionally.
The skill is being able to do both, as you said up front, because you're asking me thoughtful questions. You're clearly listening to me, but are you also having a sort of dialogue in your brain?
Of course.
To calm down?
So it's interesting because the two tools I talk about the most are something called the emotional response curve, which is what I described to you with this emotional hijacking that eventually subsides and giving time for your cognitive brain to catch up. And the other one is the listening triangle, which is just a specialized form of active listening used in negotiation. And what I've done with the listening triangle, it's really ask open-ended questions, stay silent, listen for the interest driving the other person, and then reflect back either by parroting, paraphrasing, or reframing what they said to you, and doing it over and over again. And I've been teaching this for a couple of decades. What I do when I negotiate with people is constantly using both of those things. The main tool I use to uncover what's going on with the other person, but also to slow myself down, is the listening triangle. However, it's really hard to use the listening triangle when you're emotionally overwhelmed. So there's this dance between managing my emotions by listening and then using the listening to get information that would make it less necessary for me to keep managing my emotions.
What if your questions get met with a question? I've actually had that happen to me before, and it throws me off.
So whatever anybody says to you, reflect back, including if it's a question. So, for example, if I responded to you by saying, what kind of questions have thrown you off? I'm not really answering your question. And then you can say, well, it sounds like you want to know what kind of questions are the tough ones for me. Why is that important? And now you flipped it around on me. So whatever anybody says to you, reflect back.
And are you also forcing them to think?
I'm not forcing anything. I don't think you can force anybody to do anything. But what I am doing is I'm creating the space for that. And by slowing myself down, I also slow them down. And look, when people negotiate with you, ultimately, they have some objectives they're trying to meet. And you have some objectives you're trying to meet. And if you can find solutions that meet both sets of objectives, there's a deal to be had. Otherwise, there isn't. But people act a lot of times out of stress in negotiations. And when we're stressed, we tend to rush. And that's true on my side of the table, but it's also true on the other side of the table. So by slowing myself down, I slow the whole process down. And I get both the other party and myself into a better emotional state where we can actually have a reasonable conversation and figure out how to move forward.
I love that. It's reminding me, I want to talk about money in a second, but I had Buffy Purcell, who's a financial advisor, on the show, and we were talking about money anxiety and sort of impulsiveness when you're triggered around money. And she talked about clients of hers who had gotten a really threatening letter from the IRS that made it sound like they owed $50,000 in back taxes. And the couple was so panicked, they immediately paid it, because they thought the IRS was going to come knock on their door, right, and send them to jail. And it was only, a day or two later when Buffy read the letter, she said, wait, no, they want more records. They don't want the money. But that panic had caused them to take drastic action.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if the panic caused them to take the drastic action. The panic caused them to panic. And what they did was they took drastic action. And imagine if they panicked like that, and instead of calling the IRS or sending the IRS money, they'd talk to their neighbor or their friend or somebody they trusted, and they said, here's what happened. The first thing that their friend would say is, let me see the letter.
Yeah.
Right? So the question isn't, we're going to get triggered. Life does that to us. The question is, how can we catch ourselves before we take action and do or say something we regret? How I feel is how I feel. I can feel awful. But if I can slow myself down so I don't actually do anything until I feel better, well, then I've done myself quite a favor there.
Are you ready to take your business's marketing to the next level? Meet Brevo, the all-in-one marketing and CRM platform built to help you connect with customers, boost engagement, and grow your business smarter. With Brevo, you can manage all your customer interactions in one place, nurture leads with their built-in CRM, reach your audience through email and SMS, and keep them coming back with powerful automations. But here's where it gets really cool. Aura is Brevo's AI assistant, and Aura helps you craft smarter campaigns by suggesting personalized content, optimizing send times, and even analyzing performance data to help you improve your strategy in real time. It's like having a marketing expert on your team 24/7. And of course, Brevo offers advanced analytics, seamless integrations, and AI-driven personalization, which is everything you need to create multi-channel campaigns that hit the mark every time. Get started for free today, or use code Achiever50 to save 50% on starter and standard plans for the first 3 months of an annual subscription. Just head to brevo.com/achiever and take your marketing further with Brevo and Aura. I've always been really fond of the concept in negotiation of always consult before doing or always consult before deciding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you ascribe to that or a version of that, and how much advice is enough? When a lot of us are in a negotiation, we want to get advice, right? But what's the right way to do it?
So first of all, I tend to shy away from any always or nevers. Right?
Okay. I like that.
I think that there are different negotiations. There are ones that are either not that important or not that difficult for me that I can do totally on my own and don't trigger any of these things that we're talking about.
Right.
But let's pretend I'm negotiating to change jobs. Before I make my final decision as to, do I accept the terms that I've negotiated, or, do I make the move? I'll probably talk to my wife. I'll probably talk to a couple friends of mine and people that I respect and trust, and people who think differently than I do. Because that's a key thing. You don't want just confirmatory thinking. You want someone who actually will challenge what you're thinking. And only once I put it through that do I then feel comfortable to go ahead and make those decisions. Like, you don't always have the luxury of getting advice. Sometimes you have to make decisions on the spot. And I think you have to have the confidence to do that. And the issue is, it's harder to have confidence when you're feeling anxious. But the point is, all negotiations involve risk. There's a risk to doing. There's a risk to not doing. There's a risk to saying yes to something. There's a risk to walking away from something. So you're never going to eliminate risk. And once you understand that no matter what choice you make, there's risks involved, then at some point you say, okay, then I'm going to make a choice. And one way or another, I've taken on some risk. But yeah, it's a good idea to get advice if you can get it, especially if it's an important negotiation or one that is challenging for you.
I want to talk about BATNA or anchoring in a minute, but just on this concept, I'd love your thoughts. If you know that your counterpart is anxious, is there a way that you can use that to your advantage in a negotiation?
Oh, that's a tough question, because of course you can.
Yeah.
But the question is, what's your goal? And if you're negotiating in a short-term competitive situation, let's say you're buying something on Craigslist and you notice that the other person is just so uncomfortable, could you use their anxiety to get a better price? Sure. And that's fine, because you'll never see them again, and it's a one-time transaction. And if you can get over feeling bad about it, then you're fine. But most negotiations aren't like that. Most negotiations are with people we see over and over again. And if you take advantage of that, yes, you might get some short-term advantage, but how do you feel about yourself? What have you done to that relationship? I think that when you're negotiating, you should have your big picture interests in mind. And there's lots of things you can do. Then the question is, what should you do?
Yeah. I think that's really good advice for people who feel very anxious around negotiating, right? Is that you could say to yourself, my goal here is not to get every cent out of this person who I'm going to be working with for hopefully the next 10 years, right? Because that's going to make me self-conscious when I go work with them.
Right. At the same time, I think that if you go too far in that direction, then you actually hold yourself back from negotiating at all.
Interesting.
I know so many people who have a hard time advocating for themselves because they feel like by negotiating, they're taking advantage of the other person. And this really gets at the rejection issue you brought up before. I think that it's hard to ask people to do things. And it's hard for us on a number of levels. One, we're awfully scared they're going to say no, and that rejection will feel terrible. On the other hand, I think we're also afraid they'll say yes, and then we'll feel like we took advantage of them. So imagine that you're working in an office, which not everybody does anymore, but let's say you're working in an office and a window office is opened up. And there's 20 people who have equal claim to that window office, but you run to your boss first and you ask for that window office. Now, if your boss says no, you're feeling terrible because you're thinking, my boss doesn't value me.
You're shamed. Yeah.
If your boss says yes, you're happy to move into that office, but then you think, okay, everybody else hates me. So one way or another, if you're anxious, you don't have a good out there. You're going to be you're going to be in tough shape no matter which way you go on that one.
So what's the answer? Should you duck out of it altogether because that it's not worth the emotional cost to you?
No, you should definitely ask for the office.
Why?
Well, because the worst that can happen is your boss says no, and then you're no worse off than you are. And if you get the office and other people don't, chances are they won't really hate you. That's more in your mind than in theirs. I mean, think if somebody else got the office, you wouldn't hate them. You'd resent them a little bit for getting the office, but you'd move on. It's a much bigger deal for them than it is for you.
I think that's rational, but my experience, anxiety is not rational. And if you're a ruminator, I mean, the post-event processing might be very intense for someone with clinical anxiety, right? They would fixate on that outcome.
Absolutely.
Whether it was rational or not. And so I guess that's my question. If you know that you're probably going to stew on it, is it ever okay to just be like, you know what, I'm going to protect myself from that?
No. And I'll tell you why I don't think so. Look, first, again, I don't like to deal in absolutes.
Right. Never. I got it.
But here's the problem. Let's pretend you decided for those reasons not to ask for the office. And then the worst performer on your team was the person who got to your boss and got that office. How angry are you going to be at yourself for having not asked for it?
Super angry.
So the way I see it, as an anxious person, you're going to get yourself in trouble one way or another, whether you do or you don't. This way you'll have a nice office.
Well, to be angry.
Yeah. The rejection thing, if I could just mention something about that is such a huge thing for people. And in my class at BU and with all my corporate clients as well, I do an exercise where I force people to go out in the world and ask for stuff to the point where 10 people say no to them. And they have to go out over the period of 3 weeks and keep asking for things until 10 people say no. And in doing that, one of the things they discover is how much value they've left on the table because they keep getting yeses and they get tons and tons of value. I have students who've gotten thousands of dollars worth of value just in the 3 weeks of doing this exercise. And then they also realize that when people say no to you, nobody died. They just said no. And they don't hate you. And very often it's a much bigger deal for you than it is for them. And it's a great exercise. And the way to manage some issues around anxiety is through exposure, through just forcing yourself to do it. Take small risks, start where it's safer, and then build up to bigger risks as you discover that, wait, nothing bad happened when I tried this.
I think getting rejected is a muscle that you have to build. And I say this as someone who literally, in my journey as a content creator and author, gets rejected or even worse, just ignored at least once a day.
Yeah.
And getting ignored is actually worse. When someone just ghosts you or doesn't respond, like that to me is much more anxiety triggering. But it's, it really takes practice to get rejected and be able to move on.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on all of those counts, including the how I hate getting ghosted. I'd much rather deal with somebody who says no to me or confronts me than someone who just doesn't respond.
100%.
But, when I started my business back in the 90s, I had to do a lot of cold calling because that's what happens when you start a new business. And cold calling is just planned rejection. And it was awful. I would do it for a couple hours and then I'd be depressed. But over time, you kind of get hardened to it and it doesn't impact you the same way.
Exactly. And then you find that you can take bigger risks because I think that's the key. If you are so afraid of rejection, it will keep you small. Agreed.
And I have a lot of empathy for people who are afraid of rejection. I think that very often we tend to be very judgmental about people like that. And first of all, to realize that it's us, not them. Like we all have potentially tendencies to not like rejection and react to it in that way. But also, if you can approach it from a place of understanding and understand it really does feel bad. So take small risks, take them over and over again. Have the bad feeling, but in small enough doses that it doesn't floor you. And then as you build up calluses, build up to the bigger risks. And you'll also have some really fun successes along the way. And that keeps you going.
Moshe, what question am I not asking you that you have a really valuable piece of advice to give?
So I think one thing that people aren't thinking about as much as they need to be is what they're telling themselves.
Okay.
So when I'm about to negotiate with you, or throughout the negotiation, I'm thinking about all sorts of narratives in my own mind. I have narratives about you. I have narratives about me and about the situation. If I'm thinking, Maura is this super accomplished, experienced negotiator, I don't have a chance. Well, I've just completely psyched myself out of the negotiation. Or if I say, we're heading into a recession, I got to accept any offer the company gives me. Mm-hmm. Again, I've completely talked myself out of being able to effectively advocate for my needs. So we tell ourselves stories all the time about ourselves, the other person, the situations, and those stories have a profound impact on what we do, how we feel, and how we interact with other people. And the thing to remember is that these stories exist entirely in our own minds. And because of that, we have the ability to rewrite them if we can first be aware of them, slow ourselves down so we don't just react out of the panic to them, and then ask ourselves, what other story could we say to ourselves? It's not that our first story is wrong, but chances are it's not the only story we can be telling. And if we do that, we can learn how to be the authors of our stories rather than the victims of our own stories. Because very often, by being the victims of our own stories, we put ourselves in a situation that becomes very, very difficult for us to get out of spinning in our own anxiety and to actually advocate effectively for ourselves. So I think the question is, what are you telling yourself? And when I coach people in negotiation, it's one of those questions I ask very, very frequently.
How can having a BATNA or a goal number help around that? Or does it help?
It can help a lot, actually. So any negotiation occurs in the shadow of what's going to happen if you don't come to an agreement. And that's the BATNA. So the more knowledgeable and aware you are about what's going to happen if you don't come to an agreement, the less scary it is. I think a lot of times in negotiations, we react to fear of the unknown. And if I think, if I don't accept this job, something terrible will happen. Well, I was actually coaching somebody the other day who was considering a negotiation like this. And I stopped her and I said, all right, what's actually going to happen if they don't accept your suggestion? And she said, well, I can find another job in 2 weeks. And I'm like, well, how do you feel now? She's like, way more confident. So, and she had that alternative out there all the time, but she wasn't focused on it. She was like, what if I get, what if I have to part ways with my employer? And she was spinning around on that until she started thinking about it. What really will happen? And she realized her skills are in huge demand. That makes you feel much better.
Right. It's just the temperature goes down on the negotiation.
And let me push it further. Even if your alternatives aren't that good, just being aware of them and sitting with them makes them less scary. I think a bad certainty is actually less anxiety provoking than uncertainty.
That's it for this week's show. If you like the show, follow us and tell your friends. And please leave us a review. It really helps the anxious achiever get found by people just waiting for our content. I'm your host, Maura Aarons-Mele. Lots more to come in the next episode.